Hello and welcome to the Reset Show number 19. Today's show is entitled Take Pride, and to help us on that mission is today's special guest, Sheila Parry, who is of course the author of the 2018 book, Take Pride, How to Build Organizational Success Through People. As well as being passionate about people and business, Sheila is a big fan of cricket, giraffes, and gin. Well, at least that's what I've gathered from looking at her Twitter feed. So Sheila, thanks very much for joining us today. In a moment, you can confirm or correct my assumptions. But for now, a quick round of thank yous to my co-hosts, of course, Belinda Ganaway and Emma Bridger, our researcher and show producer and all-round star, Katie Austin, our live studio audience, some regular faces there, welcome to you. And of course, ultimately to you, our YouTube watchers and podcast listeners. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks one and all. So up next to bat is Emma to tell you a bit about the show.
Cool, thanks Justin, and welcome everybody to the Reset Show. If you've been here before, you know the score, you know what this is all about, but just in case you're a new listener, and if you are, welcome, or a new viewer. The Reset Show was put together originally about a year ago to bring together like-minded people and wonderful guests to think about how we can make the most of the opportunities that we have available to us at the moment of being able to do things differently and do things better, in a better way, to help people thrive and be their best selves at work. So that's what this is all about. So welcome to the show, and welcome Sheila. Going to hand over to B now, who's going to kick off proceedings. So over to you, B.
Thank you. So I get to explain a little bit about how I met Sheila and how we've come to be here. So I feel a little bit of a fraud because Emma and Sheila actually go way back. I think you established us about 16 or 17 years. And actually Sheila and I actually only met a couple of months ago when I was giving a talk about Emma and my new book on EX design. I was giving a talk to the IABC, and Sheila, I think you asked a great question about measurement and evaluation. So now it's our turn to ask you some hopefully equally good questions. So thank you very much for joining us. I don't think we've ever mentioned giraffes on a show before, but I think they've come up twice before we started recording. So I'd love to know that. But I guess my first question for you, is there anything in Justin's introduction to you, anything that hasn't been mentioned that we really should know about you?
No, I think Justin found out my true self. I suppose, thank you so much for inviting me. I should say that first of all, but I think what I would say is that when pretty early on in my career, I was so lucky because I landed a job I loved. And I thought that was normal. And so over the course of my career, I've obviously come across people who haven't always loved their jobs. And that's what began the passion for me to try to make work better, frankly, and to kill the sort of myths about work being bad for you on so many fronts. So I guess that's it. I think my passion for people in business hopefully will come out over the next few minutes. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I love that. I mean, how lucky. So your first experience of work was such a positive one. I think my first experience of work was actually my father talking about work. He hated his work so much that he wouldn't let us introduce it as a topic of conversation at all, ever, at home. So that was my introduction to the world of work, about just how negative an experience it could be. So polar opposites there. So you've obviously, since that first really, actually, why don't you tell us what you did from that first point where you had this job that you really loved and you thought this would be the way it should be. What did you do from there? What did your career sort of journey look like from there? What are some of the things that you've done on that journey around making work better for people?
Okay, so I started off my proper career in advertising, actually. And I was really lucky to work in a quite an exciting advertising agency called Yellowhammer in the 1980s, which was kind of like the top of the second division. It wasn't up there with McCann's and Saatchi's and what have you, but it was a really gritty, busy agency. And I worked on below the line, which meant all the stuff that you don't always pay for media. You have the leaflets in the banks and the magazines, the loyalty magazines and stuff like that. And I just began to realize that how business worked. At first it was all about the message and the creative and the image, but with below the line, you actually have to sort of go through almost like a supply chain. It's a bit sort of, I became a bit of an anorak really about how business worked, and all the communication that goes on around business. Was the bits that I was doing. I wasn't like a copywriter or an art director, I was an account manager, but you did all the kind of the sort of behind the scenes stuff. And so I started writing about people's lives at work, and that got into, weirdly, internal communications in a later form. It's in an early form actually, in the late 80s, early 90s. And then I started, I mean, I think if you ask people what they do and they're passionate about what they do, it's really infectious. And so I kind of had a very positive energy around work. And then inevitably I got the job I hated, like we all do at one particular point. And I realized I had to escape. And in that process, began to think, well, what is it? What is it that makes the workplace a really good place? And what is it that spoils it? And well, we'll get to it, but I suppose a fundamental learning is that people make or break your experience at work, above all others. And so if you can find the right people to work with, and if you then start being a manager or a leader, and you can generate that positive team of positivity around your people and get the best out of them, and get them to love being there, then you create the right environment for the majority. And so it sort of evolved, with realization, but through personal experience, really.
Fabulous. So super interesting career, and obviously you had your own business as well, and a successful book. What are you doing now?
Well, since the book, actually, I mean, it has taken me into the role of working more directly with individuals, and that actually was a departure. That was a step I was wanting to take, because I think when you work in an agency, my agency was an employee communications agency, and by default our clients were very large. I mean, clients who have budgets to spend on internal communications externally with campaigns or strategy tend to be very large, and so the impact that we had was it was measurable and it was good, but it wasn't always at the nub of the problem or at the nub of the people that we needed to reach in order to affect change. So towards the end of my career at Blue Ballroom, I worked with the most fantastic CEO, and I will give him a credit. He's called Friedrich George Lischka, a lovely CEO who I met when he was at Mars Drinks, and he was the leader of about 500 people across the UK, France and Germany. And his passion for people and business, actually, I mean, he was a really sort of numbers man as well. His passion for people was so sort of tangible that I started to talk to him about, I was appointed to him as a communications consultant because I had a lot of experience of working with German business people in Germany and outside Germany. And I worked with him directly on communications consultancy for him and for his personal style and personal effectiveness as a communicator. But his sort of philosophy was so tangible and real, I started to kind of try to define it. So that was a pivotal point that made me want to work more with individuals as opposed to big brands and big campaigns. And the books allowed me to do that, because people tend to call me now if they want to do something. It's not like a case of pitching for work. It's a case of, I think we've got this issue. I think you can help. Can we talk about it? And that's the departure I needed, I think, at the point of my career. That's what I love. That's what I love.
I've got such a visual image of that relationship, and then the book being a real bridge to what you're doing now and working with individuals as opposed to corporates and teams. So really interesting, which probably leads us into, tell us a little bit about pride.
Yeah, so pride as a concept, I think, is fascinating in the world of work, because it's one of those words that's bandied around. I think way back in one of my other favorite jobs, which was with DHL in the 90s, my first job, I had to communicate the results of the employee opinion survey. And there was this question, how proud are you to work at DHL? And the score was like really high. I mean, it's like, high 80s, or I don't know, really, really high, something that really only big brands tend to achieve. And yet, if you delved into other areas where they needed to improve, they seemed really counterintuitive. And I mean, this was a good company and a company that invested in people, but they still had issues like, people not always being free to speak their mind, or feeling confident in speaking their mind, or not being totally informed about where their department was going, like just the normal stuff, not the big critical stuff. And I started thinking, well, how is it that 80% of people vote for saying, yes, I'm proud to work here, but there are these other issues going on? And if you go to companies at the other end of the scale with toxic cultures, you could be very proud to work for a brand because it's got a great brand reputation, but then you get to the company, as I did in my bad experience, which I won't name and shame, but my bad experience was I was so excited to go and work for this big brand, and I got there, and the integrity of the reputation wasn't present, and there were issues there around delivery, or the integrity of the brand promise just wasn't there, and that's what those are the two fundamental parts, or two of the fundamental parts of the Pride model: the reputation of your brand and the integrity of that offering. And my life's work actually has been about making brand promise real. I mean, even in the agency, that was what we did. We made sure that the internal experience of working for a company actually chimed with the reputation of that organization. Like DHL, I worked for 15 years with DHL on internal communications, engagement, culture, and values, and they were one of the forerunners of making that brand promise real in my career anyway. But I wanted to go in deep to Pride and say, what really does Pride mean, and what makes you proud to work for Tony's Chocolonely or Cadbury's, knowing that they're completely different companies in the chocolate arena? What triggers those emotions? So Pride is all about, my model is all about uncovering what it means to have pride, and then identifying those conditions that generate pride. And as I say, reputation and integrity are the fundamentals, but you could be a good company if you get those right. But in order to be a brilliant company, there are other things that pride entails, and we'll come to them. But purpose and energy and direction, etc.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, since you wrote the book, I mean, we can break it down as you say. We can look at each of the letters in it a little bit more. But I'm just interested in, with the work that you're doing at the moment, where are you seeing the biggest shifts and trends, sort of within or maybe even counter to the kind of like the core elements of the Pride approach?
Sure. I think that when I wrote the book, the whole concept of purpose was emerging as a corporate theme, let's call it that. My passionate belief is that people have always needed purpose. This is not a millennial phenomenon. It's not only for the people who work in healthcare or pharmaceuticals or education. We're all looking for purpose, and if you find purpose at work, you will have a fundamental part of what will make you happy. I mean, that there's the stats, but just let's talk common sense and feeling. If you love what you do and you have purpose, you think you're doing good, you think you're making contribution, you think you're using your skills, you think you're learning, whatever it is that turns you on, you'll have one big step. Now, when I wrote the book, that was sort of on the agenda, and in my view, it was partly because of millennials talking about it more, but it was a lot to do with the fact that we just had the financial crisis, we just had the MP's expenses crisis, we just had the crisis of Jimmy Savile at the BBC. A lot of the institutions that we trust had let us down. And so a lot of corporates had to reinvent themselves or reinvent their reputation. And frankly, they were using purpose as a kind of renaissance of trust, to say, we'll come and look at us, we'll try to do things better. And so it became a little bit of a slow, a bit of a sort of tactic, I think. Having said that, there are so many corporations who have truly brilliant purposes. And so, there are companies that I researched for the book, like Gandhi's, the travel clothing company that was founded by the two of the boys who were orphaned in the tsunami of 2004. They started as flip-flops for orphans, and they ended up, as Gandhi's, which is a high quality travel clothing brand, but they are there to make life better for fellow orphans. They give that a percentage of their profits away. They have lots of projects that support kids who need to be supported in learning and in the community. Now, you all have your favorites. We all know some of them, and then there are companies that like the Blue Ballroom that I ran. I set it up to do good internal communications, creative work. It was there as like an advertising agency, but for internal comms. But after a few years, I thought, actually, the impact's a bit more serious than that. We're actually probably improving the lives of some people at work, and that became our purpose, to make work better, to improve the communication skills of our clients, not the campaigns, and to where we cross over with you, improve the employee experience. It's fundamental. And so that became my purpose. I didn't wake up with it when I was 25. It evolved, and I still need to refresh my purpose from time to time. And so do companies. So I think purpose is it was something that was very current, and it was emerging when I started researching sort of 2015, 2016. But now, my goodness, there's a lot more sort of, I think, authentic responsibility around corporates now. And I think they're not, there's well-being, and there's mental health awareness, there's being an authentic leader, there's being a socially responsible corporate. I think those things are all connected, and I think they are connected to a real trend of responsible business and society and employees and stakeholders and shareholders and to some extent customers wanting to see businesses acting more responsibly. And I think that there was a sort of mini trend, if you like, when I started writing, but that's become quite a change, I think, in my experience of how business behaves in this century, 21st century.
I've got one more sort of follow-on question to your sort of observation, and then I'll come to Emma, because I know that she'll definitely want to explore stuff around sort of meaning of work and other things as well. But I'm imagining, and maybe I'm just jumping conclusions, that trend of responsible business and all the stuff we talked about seems very different to probably the advertising agency world that you're working in at the beginning of your career. Or am I drawing conclusions that just aren't right?
That's a great question, actually. I think, let's say, at 30 or 40 years on, my sensitivities are probably greater now to what CEOs and boards care about. But I could probably say, in 1983, the focus was on profit. The focus was on big splashy brands, and the fun, if you like, I think, around the communications industry was, let's go and work let's go and work for Barclays Bank because they're hiring Ridley Scott for their TV commercial, and we're all going to, you know, be on another planet, and we're going to have, you know, lots of drama. I think, yes, probably we were more worried about profit, but I don't know if it's just the wisdom of a bit of experience that, you know, you get a bit more serious. Having said that, Yellowhammer, we worked for Greenpeace, and I mean, they were trying to change the supply of the fur trade, you know, so that there was ethical business, and there were, you know, there were causes that we worked on then. But certainly I didn't worry so much about the impact, and I was definitely more excited by the message.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I started my working life as a journalist and then PR and marketing, and actually even when I was doing my postgrad in marketing, the focus was, what's the objective of marketing? It's to deliver shareholder value, profits, money. There was, you know, if there was a mention of anything to do with responsible business, it was that sort of like very narrow strand that was known as CSR, but it was all about shareholder value.
Yes, well, I think the question you were sort of getting at with purpose, people used to talk about greenwash, didn't they?
Yes.
You know, and whether companies were just sort of saying that they were worrying about the environment or turning the lights off when they went home, or shredding their paper, and they didn't really care about the sort of economic impact of their supply chain. and now companies, you know, do. And I think to be really sustainable in the commercial sense, companies now have to think of the long-term impacts of their business on the environment and on society.
Yes, it must have been a lot easier to be a CEO of a big corporate, I would imagine, in the 80s, when you had one task to make more money, than it is now to make money and do it ethically and responsibly and sustainably, etc., etc.
Yes, I guess so. And also people, you know, I think when I started, it wasn't quite in the dark ages when you were grateful to have a job. But I did enter the workforce after the 1980s recession, and I was grateful to have a job. And you know, I wasn't joining a company asking when I was going to become a director. You know, I didn't have that. Companies that I worked for didn't have that employee-centric approach that many do display now. So I think possibly the relationship of, you know, the value of the individual and the relationship between employee and employer has changed over my career, and I think that's changed for the better. So that, you know, employees, and that this is like one of my kind of, I don't know, many soapboxes, is the importance of the individual at every step of the way in your life. But I mean, in your career, even if you work in a company of, like in DHR, you know, like it's part of Deutsche Post, it's like 500,000 employees. So, you know, like the directors there maybe have, you know, units with hundreds of thousands of people. They're not real structures. The real structure is what it's like to work in that hub in Reading, or that hub in, you know, wherever around the world, and your relationships with those 100 people, or your 50 people, or your shift of 20. And this is one of my mantras, really, is that you can make a difference to your own success, but you can also make a huge difference to the success of your team. And with the days of Facebook, and we all know thousands of people, and we all know, you know, the intimate secrets of their lives, and you know, every single person, if they're a boss, you can know 100 people really well. Nobody is too clever or too busy or too important not to know their team.
Yes.
And so, like the lovely Friedrich at Mars Drinks, I used to think, well, actually, you know, if a company of 100,000 had, you know, 1,000 Friedrichs, or I should say Fredericas, it would actually change the culture. If it's all little, we're all working in little communities, and everybody matters. And I think that companies generally, business generally, is getting much better at understanding that. than they were in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, this is gobbledygook for the 80s.
Yes, I love it. Thank you, Emma. Love to bring you in.
Cool, thank you. Really interesting, Sheila, and won't surprise you to hear that, you know, everything you're saying is completely resonating with what we talk about and what we write about and the way we do business. Just going to pick up on the purpose point, then I'll ask you a question. I think it's really interesting. We talk a lot about purpose, obviously, and I have a little soapbox moment as well about purpose, which is there's a lot of people that do jobs that would probably find it pretty insulting if you tried to give them some big transcendental purpose. So I always talk about when I was trimming lettuces as a student, and I was bringing up the trimming lettuces job because it was a really crappy job. I worked in a farm, a big farm. There wasn't a purpose. If someone had tried to convince me there was some kind of big transcendental purpose, I'd have been really, really effed off with that. They tried to say we're helping to put, you know, salad on the nation's tables. I'd have been like, no, I'm just trimming lettuces, mate. You know. So I think it's really easy to kind of, you know, because we work with big corporates, right? And it's much easier when you're a big corporate. And over the years, you know, the purpose of the big piece started, I think, with the obvious places. So you would give for charities, they've got a great purpose. And then after a while, I mean, I did a lot of work with Capital One and their purpose and their mission, which is about changing banking for good. And I was taken on a journey with that, with working with them, and realized that actually the less obvious players could have a really great purpose. And I really bought into that, and it's changed. But I still think there's a lot of people that do jobs where, you know, they don't have purpose with the big people. They get their meaning, as you say, from the fact that they love the people they work with. They love their customers, for example. They love every day serving, you know, teas and coffees to the people that come into their shop because they have a great conversation with them. And I think it's just really useful to kind of remember that piece as well. But if you've got any thoughts on any of that, bit of a ramble there from me, bit of a soapbox moment from me.
Yeah, well, I have been challenged about this, I suppose. I think part of the problem with thinking that people want a transcendental purpose is that you don't recognize what their purpose is to them.
Yeah.
And you know, not everybody, like I used to say this to, and I think, you know, I'll tell you somebody clever who said it. Frank Appel, CEO, Deutsche Post, DHL. He said, as the sort of what's the word, the sort of spokesman of purpose for his own company. He said, look, you know, in some people, you know, if you start talking about purpose at work, they think you're trying to be a priest. You know, they think of it as a sort of religious, or it's a topic for spiritual leaders, not company leaders. And so he was very good at making purpose relevant for individuals. And I think this is part of wanting people to feel pride in what they do. I don't wake up in the morning worrying about, you know, when I work for Mars Drinks, you know, I wasn't worrying about, you know, the state of the sort of vending machine, you know, market. That didn't actually fire me up. What I was wanting was to help somebody be as effective as they could be in their job. From what I did, I could help Friedrich understand the very strange environment of moving to Slough from, you know, Frankfurt and working in a new environment. I could say to him, you know, the differences between the English and the German business communications is whatever. I could tell him to, you know, he loved football, so like he was onto a winner, you know. But I mean, I could sort of talk to him about how to communicate more effectively with his teams. That was my purpose, not whether or not the vending machine market was going to, you know, rise or fall. So when you were picking lettuces, you were probably doing it for cash to do something much more interesting, you know? and that's okay. You know, we don't all need to change the world. Even Simon Sinek says it, you know, you don't want to change the world, you want to change the one experience of your customer in front of you.
Absolutely.
That day.
Yeah. We had Rob on from Tailored Thinking recently talking about job crafting. I think this is where job crafting really comes into its own. That idea that, you know, you may have a little bit of autonomy to just make some little tweaks to the job you're doing to give you a sense of actually, I can get something out of this. So the obvious example is the cleaner who tends to everyone's plants when she or he cleans the office, and they get something out of that. So I think it's spot on. I wanted to come back to the Pride model because I'm really interested in energy. So talk to me about energy. That's a really interesting one.
Oh wow, energy. Well, particularly now, isn't it? I mean, this is another thing that, it's I think a lot of people are talking about energy now because we are all lacking so many sources of energy. So I think I'd like to sort of approach it that way. Energy at work, I think, is that element that will enable you to keep on going. I looked at energy back in before the book as a kind of economic factor about work that not a lot of people were looking at, and that's connected to how long we simply have to work. Like we can celebrate the fact we're living longer, and yet in order to fund our lives, we are all going to have to work longer. So retirement, if you like, that used to be a fixed point in someone's life, set in the years when most people died at 70 or 75. Retirement was actually quite a short time at the end of your life if you're looking at it statistically. Either it's going to be very long, or you're going to have a blend. And most people I know in the post-retirement years, as far as age is concerned, are working, like they have portfolio careers, or they're working part-time or whatever, but they're all having to earn more money to live. And companies were very quick to sort of discard people in early retirement. And they weren't really thinking about helping individuals be healthy for longer so they could work for longer. So I regarded energy as that. I looked at it with those eyes. This is an economic factor that you should be worrying about, because if you want to be a sustainable company, you need to think about the global working population. As an individual, I think energy, we derive energy from different sources. And personally, I mean, without upsetting the people I live with, I love them, but I just need to get out. I need to connect with. I can't wait to get back to London for face-to-face meetings, for meetings where we brainstorm something, where we solve a problem, where we talk around it. I can't wait to go back to live theatre, to live shows. I don't want to see anything else, streamed. I'm done with it. Like the Orange Theatre is one of my favourites in Richmond. It's a tiny theatre, but my God, there's so much energy from performers and all that. So we're starved, and so we're exhausted. And whether you're working, I mean, I'm pretty lucky, I've got a nice airy room I can work in and all that sort of stuff, open space. But the things that actually excite me, apart from my work, I haven't been able to do in the last 18 months, and nor has anybody else. So those things that we do outside work aren't feeding us. That's why we're all so tired. It's not, we haven't had all those things that give us balance, that give us fresh perspective, that give us inspiration. In my case, I'm inspired by creative talent. That's what makes me believe I can do it myself.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm completely with you on all that. And as a off the scale extrovert, I'm solar powered. I get my energy from other people. I'm desperate, like you, to get back out there. Even sitting on a busy train, I can't wait. I'm like, people around me. So completely with you on that. I think it's a really, really good conversation around energy, and I know Justin will have some thoughts on this. It's definitely moving into more of your sort of field here, and I think it's really good to kind of keep this conversation going, because I think I've been reading a lot about the term languishing recently. We're not kind of, well, say we're all many of us are not in that place where we would be classed or would meet the criteria for depression, but we're not thriving, we're just languishing. And it's almost like the most challenging place to be. So on that point, I'm going to pass it over to Justin, because I think that's a good point, because it's going into your sort of field here, isn't it, Justin? So I'm sure you've got some questions for Sheila.
Oh,
Oh yes, what a great conversation, Sheila. And yeah, energy is a lovely connection point. And I see in the comments there, Steve has mentioned that in your book, he says, in your book, that you kindly gave me airtime to talk about where IC pros can get energy, drawing it from our professional community when we don't always get it within our own organizations. So that's a nice bit of feedback, and it links nicely to this idea of where we get our energy from. And in resilience terms, we talk about the importance of a support network as being an absolute essential ingredient for resilience, you know, because people tend to have this notion of resilient people being alone, solo on the mountaintop. And of course, actually the research shows that the opposite is true. That people who have been through, particularly when you look at people who've been through extreme hardship, they've got through that hardship by making connections with people, even when they've been isolated in a prison cell 24 hours a day alone. They manage to connect with other people by tapping on the pipes, for example, you know. So this thing about being connected with other people is a theme that keeps running through the Reset Show. I have a traditionally on these calls, Sheila, I like to ask the question about bringing together the organizational perspective and the personal perspective. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on pride in terms of what the connection is between pride at work and pride at home, if you like, to use a broad term. So because I'm wondering, you know, is pride something that's sort of innate, that if you find, because I'm always, you know, like you take the example of the person at the cash register at your local supermarket, they can sometimes choose to be engaged and involved and demonstrate pride in what they're doing. And then someone else will be in the same circumstances, working with the same organization, but look like it's the last place in the world that they want to basically prefer to stab themselves in the eye with a fork. And so I'm wondering, what's the difference there? Why is that happening? Is that to do with the personal quality that people have, or what?
So I'm really loath to say definitively A or B. I think that our contract at work is definitely two-way. It's like when people used to talk about engagement. I mean, you have to actually be open to be engaged. You know, we love the term, we live on the term, we've worked in it, but we're kind of uncomfortable with the whole term engagement. But it, you know, it's work is not a one-way street, nor is energy. You know, energy, we have a responsibility to be healthy enough, to keep ourselves healthy enough to perform our role, and an organization has a responsibility to keep us safe and well within the parameters of our role. So it's a, you know, the whole kind of EVP is a contract, but life can be so much more than that, you know, and work and life are so blended, you know, that I don't think it's possible. I'll say that to be happy if you're miserable at work, or to be happy if you're miserable in your domestic relationships. So it's both, you know. But these two people sitting at their cash desks, definitely it's partly them. But my philosophy is that in the workplace, if you can make everything else even-handed, fair, encouraging, positive, mutual, collaborative, that creates an energy, a culture or an energy or whatever you'd like to call it around that workplace that is infectious.
Yeah.
So I had, you know, 20 employees, and one of my favorite of all the employees in all the times I've worked and employed people, there was somebody who just didn't engage in our culture. They were more solitary. They were more critical. You know, they just didn't have that kind of performing seal happy clappy Jean, you know, that a lot of us do in communications. And frankly, it was a struggle because, you know, we had to have conversations about it, because even though, you know, we didn't all need to be the same, we all needed to have buy-in to the culture that we were creating in the agency, that for the majority. So I had to say to this highly talented individual, you know, when I come in the morning, I really do expect you to take your hand off your mouse and your earphones, your headphones off, and say good morning. And I don't care if I've come in 10 minutes after the last time you did it. You know, we're a team, and we need each other, and we need each other to you know, to do this and to generate this culture between us. You know, and that's just a tiny example, but you kind of take an example of somebody who's not pulling their weight. You know, you need to tell them. Yeah. You can't just leave unengaged people lying around, you know, influencing others. And actually, people have choice. I mean, this lovely person I'm telling you about who worked with me for like 12 years. So they can't have hated the culture that much, you know. And we're friends, you know, but we had different styles. But when it came to things that mattered, like acknowledging each other, communicating with each other, being open to change, you know, respecting each other's wishes, you know, of course they had those strengths, and we had that in common. They just wouldn't smile as much, you know. But, yeah. And you know, I do think that you really can make the offer to people to love their job, to do something that they're proud of, to identify what it is. And that's the thing with what Emma was saying about, you know, picking lettuces. I mean, you do want people to do that well. You do want people not to sabotage your crop. You do need them to give the best they can give in that role, and you're not getting that if somebody on a checkout is not smiling.
Yeah. So I love your answer. Thank you, Sheila. Of course, it's not A or B, is it? But I wanted to explore that question with you because I'm fascinated always by the connection between, yes, the world at home and the world of work. And I agree with you that, I mean, soapbox moment, I'm always saying that to people who I work with. I'm like, there isn't a balance. It's a blend. We're the same person. We're just in a different room or on a different Zoom as it is for. Yeah. So although not so many of us, if we've read the recent research into how many people who've been working from home, it's not actually that many. Slight digression. So I find that really interesting, and it's now sparked a conversation that I think I'll pick up with Emma and Belinda and Kate afterwards about the role of recruitment as well in creating a great employee experience. Because if you get the right people, if you can manage to get the right people right at the beginning, then of course that makes the journey and the possibility of them developing pride much easier, doesn't it? I mean, you look at someone like Pret a Manger, who obviously have a very, very clear recruitment policy around the type of people they want to be representing them to the public, and it's pretty universal, isn't it? So recruitment, and then leadership, and then ultimately, change and choice if things don't quite fit together. Sheila, thank you. I'm going to pass over to Belinda because we're running tight on time. So thank you, and back to you, B.
I loved your point about respecting individual differences and styles, but also knowing where everybody is responsible for upholding the culture. So we're not asking everybody to be the same, but we're asking everybody to respect and support the culture in those most important elements. And I was thinking, Emma and I are having a big conversation at the moment about understanding and designing the best possible hybrid experience for different organizations. That looks different everywhere, obviously. actually, I'm wondering whether those individual differences, you know, the person that doesn't look up and say hello, for example, whether that is amplified when people are remote. There's something about the distance that amplifies those. So actually having that conversation about how do we want this team to be, how do we want our culture to be, what are our our golden rules almost, that we must all, yes, we can be individually different, but what are the things that we must all uphold, you know, that we can agree on. That feels like a really valuable conversation to have around hybrid. So thank you for throwing that into the mix. It's definitely got me thinking. I've got one last, is a little big question for you, which is, what are you most proud of?
Oh God, oh God, it's what I ask everybody. You ask me that and it just proves how personal it is. You know, this is like a personal emotion. It's a very private, not private, but it's a very individual emotion. And when I ask other people that they generally go to something that involves people they love, and very much other people. It isn't often generated, you know, from this huge wealth of pride oneself. And so I think, you know, I'm a wife and a mum, and so I have to say, you know, I'm really proud of the relationships I have with my family, and we laugh about you know, COVID and lockdown, but actually the fact that, you know, 3 adults chose to come back and live with me and my husband for 5 months. You know, they're in their late 20s, 30, you know, and, you know, independent people coming back to mum and dad. I'm actually thrilled, because it shows they wanted to be with us, as opposed to in their cold, lonely, empty flats, not, as opposed to, you know, in their nice, you know, with other people. So, you know, I'm really proud of that. I'm proud of the relationships I have with a lot of people. You know, at my book launch, one of my clients hosted, and unbeknownst to me, had gone around the room finding out how long people had known me. And so he played this game, you know, about how long I'd known people, and an awful lot of people in the room I'd known, you know, a long time. And so I really love people, and I like the relationships I have with people. So I guess that's that, you know, if you really push me, that's it. And the fact that, you know, my kids bought me a big birthday present, and I did a skydive, you know, and they all came to watch me, and it's the last thing I did in 2019, with, you know, clasped tightly to a lovely paratrooper. You know, I mean, you know, that gives me an energy rush just thinking about it, and you know, I recommend it thoroughly to anybody who hasn't done it.
Wow. So, yeah. I love both of your answers to that last little big question. Thank you so much. Now I'll hand back to Justin to finish us off.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Belinda. And I have to say, finish with an apology to Steve, who he also had a last little big question, which we won't get to. So apologies for that, Steve. But I think you know Sheila anyway, so you can just call her up and meet her in person, have a cup of tea with her, yes, or a glass of gin. Anyway, Sheila, thank you so much. And what a lovely theme to finish on, which, as I've said earlier, is the thread that runs through all of these conversations, is the importance of connection. So you're talking there about your relationship with your husband and your children, and how proud it's easy for me to say how proud you are of your role as a wife and a mum and a skydiver. Thank you, Sheila. You've done what great conversations do, which has sparked many more questions for further conversations. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom and insight with us. Folks, if you liked that and you want to see some more fantastic industry experts talking about their pet topics, please do join us next time. On the 2nd of June, we will be joined, we have a double header, 2 headline guests next time. We've got Paul Barber and Lucy Widdowson on building top performing teams. So again, a theme very close to the conversation today, how pride perhaps plays a part in that too. We shall find out. In the meantime, thank you for joining us live. Thanks to my co-hosts and producer and our very special guest, Sheila Parry. Thanks to all of you for viewing. Final request, if you do like what we do, please review and recommend. And if you don't, zip it. Thanks very much, folks. See you next time. Bye-bye.